This video is going to demonstrate how to draw your hand from observation. So what I want you to do is choose an interesting pose that you like. It should not be a flat pose where you just trace your hand. That's not what I'm looking for in this activity. So I'm just going to have my hand kind of relaxed here. And obviously this is not my drawing hand. Now, one thing that is really difficult about drawing hands is that each of these has little segments. So really it's like the part of the body that has more bones is more complicated because it has bends and everything else. So what I usually do is look at the contour. We talked about contour line drawing and gesture drawing. When we're going to just look at the outside. So it's almost like I'm going to be drawing kind of a mitten when I first start. So just like I drew my object, I'm constantly going to be going back and forth looking at my hand, to my paper, constantly referring back to what I'm drawing because I don't want to make a mistake by just making it up. Yes, I know what hands look like, but I want to draw this hand, not any others, okay? Not just an imaginary hand that's in my brain. So I'm doing gesture drawing because that's what I'm most comfortable with. If you're more comfortable doing the contour line drawing, then by all means try that. Do what is most comfortable for you. So I'm not going to break this part up into the separate fingers just yet. It's almost like I'm going to draw a mitten here. And then once I get that right, then I can start breaking it up into the different sections. I should have taped my paper to my table because it keeps wanting to move. All right, so here you see my thumb and then you see this big section. So now that I got that, now I can start breaking that up into the smaller sections for my different fingers. Now it's important to remember where the fingers can bend. So we often get these kind of like rubber-like fingers that bend in all unnatural ways. So try to make sure that you are paying attention to where the bends happen. So we don't get kind of this rubber finger look. Now, as I continue on with my fingers, they get a little bit more complex because of something that's called foreshortening. This finger, while it looks a little bit different for you, is actually coming almost straight out at me in my view. And so that finger is going to be a little bit more difficult to draw. It's going to be shorter because it's coming straight out at me. And that is more difficult to draw than just a normal finger that is just kind of sitting there. Side view is probably the easiest way of drawing something. And a frontal view where it's coming straight out at you is a little bit more difficult. All right, so I have some fingers and they look kind of a little bit mangled. I think once I start, going back and adding some details to those fingers, they'll start looking a little bit more realistic and a little bit better. But I have my main stuff down, so now I can start looking at some more details. Like for instance, I do have a fingernail over here that I can add. The more details you add to your hands, the more realistic they're going to be. So really paying attention to kind of where those wrinkles are. Those wrinkles really are the bends of your your fingers. So if you add them, they're going to start looking a little bit more realistic. So I'm just going to keep working around, looking at the different sections, adding some wrinkles. Another challenge in this is that your hand will gradually change. It's hard to keep the position exactly the same. And so that makes the drawings a little bit more fluid. There's a little bit more movement in the drawings because of the fact that you can move. All right, so I don't really see a fingernail on this one, so I'm not going to bother with that. I do see a foreshortened fingernail here, so it's going to look a little bit different. It almost looks like a little moon when I draw it. So there's a bunch of shading on this finger because of this finger. So once I start shading, like, which happens probably after I start adding all my details, then I'm going to start adding, oh wait, I erased the wrong thing. Start adding some shading too to get some form into my fingers. So this looks like I lengthened that area a little bit too much. Now that I'm like observing this a little bit more, I feel like I need to adjust this finger a little bit. It does not extend beyond that one. It's a little bit shorter, but it does overlap. So I need to make sure I overlap it, but not extend it beyond. All right, so I don't need these guidelines anymore, so I can go ahead and get rid of those guidelines. So now that I have everything drawn, now the cleanup process really has to begin in order to make my drawing look good. It looks pretty, sketchy, and that's okay, especially considering that it's a drawing from something that's alive. My hand is alive. Compared to an object that's sitting there. So it is okay to have it a little bit rough and kind of gestural. But some of my areas are pretty rough. Like this area here is pretty rough. So I might go back and like kind of clean up those edges a little bit. But then also start adding some shading. So I'll start to get a little bit of dimension in my hand so it won't look so flat. And now I don't make up the shading either. I'll definitely look at where the shadows are on my hand itself. So areas that I'm not going to add a lot of shading to, I will clean up those extra lines a little bit, make it look a little bit better. All right, so this is a drawing where I'm just starting to develop my hand. I wouldn't say it's complete, but it's starting to come along. So what I want you to do is pose your hand. Again, it cannot be a flat pose where you're just doing a hand turkey on your on your paper. That doesn't work for me. It needs to be a little bit more complicated than that. And then again, what I did was I made kind of a mitten. I don't know, this looks over here kind of weird. Like I need to adjust that a little bit. Then I made kind of a mitten, and then I started breaking the mitten down into its sections, adding some detail, and then I started shading. Go ahead and try it.